Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Friday, February 28th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's choosing to join us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? That chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, please send me an email at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. Alternatively, if you're listening to this show today through live.meedle.com/mindshiftersradio on the internet, we're glad to have you here. But if you're listening through the internet, you don't have access to dropping us a comment or calling in live. To do that, you would need to download the Needle app. It's from your app store, NEDL. It's listed as an AI tuner for live radio. And if you download that app and log in, answer a couple questions, then you'll have the opportunity to either type a comment in or actually tap the phone icon and talk to us voice to voice live. And we would appreciate it, as we do every time anybody does that, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, and that's just a lot easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. So we have plenty of time. It's a Friday. Plenty of time for comments or questions or worksheets if anybody wants help doing a worksheet or framing out a worksheet. I should mention that we had our support group last night. We had a brand new attendee who's never before been there, and some people who've returned for the second time and had come back for the first time in weeks or months. So it's light and lively and always productive. I have tremendous gratitude for everybody who chooses to join us in those sessions. And every Tuesday and Thursday, for the most part, most Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have that option. And all the information that you would need to be able to join us for one of those sessions is available on the mindshiftersacademy.org website. So the other thing that I wanted to get at right away here in the beginning of this call is to let people know that I was remiss yesterday and said Michael and Jeanie would be live on Needle, but Michael has begun quantum healing. It began yesterday and it will go through March 7th. And so all the rest of these days, Friday and all next week, they're going to be playing pre-recorded shows on Podbean that aren't available unless you buy the DVDs from them. So they're going to put out yesterday, today, and all next week 7 pre-recorded live workshops that normally people would have to buy Michael's DVDs to see or hear. So yesterday was the Circle of Life Part 1. Today will be the Circle of Life Part 2. And on Monday they'll play Empowered to Heal Part 1. On Tuesday they'll play Empowered to Heal Part 2. And on Wednesday they'll play Dr. Michael Ryce's interview with a gentleman whose name just escaped me, but it will come back to me. And he's talking about mind-body bioenergetics. And it's the second hour of a 2-hour video that Michael has in his catalog that the first hour was the interviewer interviewing Bruce Lipton, and the second hour is the interviewer interviewing Michael. And lots of good stuff in there, some synchronicity, some wild coincidences, and it actually led to Michael Ryce and Bruce Lipton getting connected, and Bruce Lipton having Michael Ryce's book in his possession when they talked on the phone. So, and then on Thursday they'll have Naturopathic Keys to Health Part 1, and on Friday, a week from today, they'll play Naturopathic Keys to Health Part 2, and those will all be available on Podbean and the Mind Shifters radio show through Podbean. So, apologies for the lack of good input on that yesterday, but that's the update. That's what's happening with the second hour, because Michael is up to his eyeballs in helping people with the Quantum Healing series. And if you want any information about that, you can get the full details on their flyer at whyagain.org/quantum-healing-series-2025. So, what's on your mind? How can we support you? How had the conversations from yesterday resonated with you or raised questions and issues? We had a number of comments in the chat room yesterday, or comments, and we tried to answer them to the best of our ability. Did the answers make sense? Did it raise more questions for you? Is there any way we can support you in getting more benefit from these shows and this work? I had somebody come into my office yesterday and talk to me about Richard Rohr. And Richard Rohr has a talk he does, or maybe it's a whole series of talks he does, around the cosmic egg. And that's interesting because then this morning, Susan Bingham sent me an article about Richard Rohr's meditations, and from Richard Rohr's Meditations, which is a newsletter he puts out. And in that one, he's talking about C.G. Jung, the psychiatrist who was a contemporary of Freud. And in that article, it says that Richard Rohr considers the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung to be a mystic who had a deep connection to the divine. And Jung was alive from 1875 to 1961. And so, lovely article she sent me. You can find that if you're interested at Richard Rohr's Daily Meditation. Search for that, and I'm sure you can find it. And it prompted me, when I got the second nudge from Susan, to talk a little bit about the cosmic egg that Richard Rohr has. He's either created it or he's expounded upon it from somebody else's work. But he uses the metaphor of the cosmic egg to explain how stories offer us meaningful connections to ourselves, one another, and the divine. And the cosmic egg, if you picture a large egg, he has it divided up into probably the lower quarter is labeled My Story, and then the next quarter is labeled Our Story, and then the next, I shouldn't put them in quarters, I should say the lower sixth is My Story, the next sixth is Our Story, and the next quarter is Other Stories, and then the remainder is The Story. And everything is contained in The Story, and the three others are just different ways to carve it up. And he talks about the dynamics that we create when we're individually person-centered, or we're family-centered, or country-centered, or we're worldview-centered, and or taking the whole thing at that higher level. And what he says is only evolved beings, mystics, etc., can relate to this the story level, the totality, which takes into account all three levels, all three other levels. So what I wanted to say about it is that Richard is a very intellectually focused spiritual person. So he talks about these things in levels. He reminds me of somebody who's a philosopher and a sociologist and a psychologist and a spiritual teacher all rolled into one. He's got this great big mind that can take these intellectual concepts and weave them together and compare them. And my mind doesn't tend to work that way. I can stretch to read an article like this and get some stuff out of it, and yet my personal tendency is to drift back to something that's very simple. Something like the options that we're given with A Course in Miracles or The Way of Mastery. And it's very simple. You either choose for fear or you choose for love. You choose for the truth of what is, or you choose for a made-up story. And the beauty of the world that we have here is that lots of different people with lots of different intellectual tendencies, we'll say, and ways of looking at things and ways that people make sense of the world, lots of different people dive into topics like this and put their take on it out there in the world, and then it increases the probability that more people will be able to either wrestle with these concepts or use them as growth tools or get an insight that benefits them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Susan, for that redirection to Richard Rohr and what he talks about in that article about Carl Jung is it's just a really nice kind of a solidification of things that a lot of people who know Carl Jung's work they think of Carl Jung as a spiritual teacher as much or even more than they think of him as a psychiatrist, because Jung's work is more artistic and playful and creative, and he talks about things like the collective unconscious and the archetypes, and he works more with myth and mysticism than somebody like Freud would, or somebody like Adler would. Certainly somebody like B.F. Skinner, a psychologist who rose to prominence on the behavior theory. So for those who are interested, if you want a little bit more intellectual and yet still very creative and playful way to think about ourselves, our lives, and our inner lives, you might look into C.G. Jung's work, Carl Gustav Jung. So comments, questions, answers, testimonials. Type something in the comments section of the app or press the phone icon and have a conversation. And what Allende has been trying to get me to do for quite a while is this radio show in his format, which would be, I'm going to start reading, and in about 10 or 15 minutes, he says, give a specific time. So at 11:32 Central Time, I'll start taking calls, but I'm joking. Of course, I'm not that rigid. So if you have a question or a comment, even if I seem to be in the middle of a reading or in a monologue, please feel free to type that into the app or tap the phone icon and raise a hand. And we'll try and get back to the book by Alan Cohen, which is titled Of Course in Miracles, When Love Becomes a Way of Life. And I'm not sure how far I got through the chapter 20, so I'm going to get back to chapter 20 and read it from the beginning. Alan titles this Your Divine Toolbox. And he writes, my friend Brenda owns a successful restaurant in Seattle. She and her husband have worked hard for years to build its reputation and its clientele. The couple has 3 children, ages 19, 17, and 15. Brenda confessed to me that soon all our kids will be out of the nest, and I'm afraid we've missed the best years of our lives and theirs because we were so focused on the restaurant while they were growing up. If we had to do it all over again, I would be with my family during those precious years and build our business after they grew up. Alan writes, the world gives us many tools to achieve success according to its standards. yet it does not guide us to be successful spiritually. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything you see looks like a nail, said Abraham Maslow. He was known as the father of humanistic psychology. If your only tools are a body and an intellect, you will be able to navigate, but only through the domain of bodies and intellects. And then, as they say, you will gain the world but miss your soul. A yogi described the physical dimension as alluring, but ultimately unsatisfying. A Course in Miracles provides a deep toolbox with many instruments to guide us home. And yet we have to put them into practice. A friend of mine bought the Reduce Your Belly abdominal exercise machine, and I asked him, how did it work for you? And he said, didn't work. I had to throw it away. I asked him, how much did you use it? He said, maybe 5 minutes a week. Well, there are lots of people that tell me that they started A Course in Miracles, but they didn't know how to make it work in their lives. When I ask them, did you do the workbook? They say, oh no, I didn't get that far. Or, I got to lesson 30, but then put it aside. And remember, there are 365 lessons. So they got to 30 out of 365 and then put it down. Alan writes, you can't blame a tool for not working if you don't use it. I used to tell people when I'd be talking about the EFT tapping or the Reality Management Worksheet or the targeted journaling, I'd say, look, if you got, a $150,000 set of tools, a laser-guided radial arm saw, the best planer and table saw, the best drills, the best sanders, and you got this fabulous big workshop, and you got enough wood to build 3 or 4 houses of fabulous furniture, and you had it all in this warehouse, and you locked it up, and you went away, and you came back a year later, how much furniture would you have? None. All the tools are there, all the materials are there, but if you're not there working with the tools, you don't get the result. Alan writes, the 12-step groups like Alcoholics Anonymous are famous for saying the program works if you work the program. And that's the way it is with any tool, including A Course in Miracles. It will give back as much or as little He says, I've often been prone to user error. I blame things for not working. But the fact is, I don't operate them properly. He said, Dee and I built a cottage in a remote area, which we powered with solar panels. When we returned after an extended absence, the system wasn't working. I grew upset with the engineer who installed the system, and I blamed him for faulty equipment or faulty installation. When he came out to repair the product, he informed me that I had not kept sufficient water in the batteries. Oops. It's easy to blame. It's much harder to take responsibility. While some people complain that A Course in Miracles is too complicated, it's actually quite simple. There are really only 2 tools to choose from. You choose the ego, or you choose the Holy Spirit. You choose fear, or you choose love. You choose illusion, or you choose truth. Each tool reinforces and takes us deeper into the thought system that upholds that tool. Ego hides in complexity. In the world, details embellish. In spirit, details distract. Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia University, president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, said, an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less until he knows absolutely everything about nothing. If you're going to become an expert in anything, let it be inner peace. As I say that, I remember Guy Finley saying, people are out there trying to teach you how to manifest a car, manifest a relationship, manifest a house. Guy Finley says, I'll give you something different to manifest, something that's really worth manifesting. Find a way to manifest how to be happy with whatever you have right now. That's what came to mind when I read Alan's line saying, if you're going to become an expert at anything, become an expert at inner peace. Alan writes, A Course in Miracles teacher Michael Murdad said, whenever you process the Course through the intellect rather than the heart, you crucify Christ all over again. We can understand A Course in Miracles somewhat through the mind, but that boat will take you just so far. It's not equipped to cross the ocean of samsara. Only the soul provides worthy transport. And then he quotes A Course in Miracles from the textbook, like page 11, saying, this is a very simple course. Alan writes, anthropologist Jane Goodall made the breakthrough discovery that chimpanzees, like human beings, make tools. She observed chimps taking a reed and poking it into a crevice in the wood and dislodging termites that the chimpanzees could then eat. We might think of A Course in Miracles as a breakthrough tool to help us dislodge the termites of ego so that they don't eat away at the foundations of our life. If we want to be smart monkeys, we can practice this summary of A Course in Miracles where it says, do not see error, close quotes. Do not see error. Then he quotes the textbook saying, all healing is essentially the release from fear. He writes, any tool that reduces fear is worthy of using. In the documentary Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies, a man recounts that he was on an airplane and he encountered severe turbulence. A woman seated near him was screaming, we're all going to crash, we're all going to die. The man got up and told the woman that he was a structural engineer. He helped design this plane and he knows there's no possible way the plane's going to crash. The woman calmed down considerably. The truth is, that man was not a structural engineer at all. And yet his lie saved this woman emotionally, along with the other passengers that her fright was spreading to. The man's lie was closer to the absolute truth than her terrified mindset. That man employed a lighter illusion to offset a darker illusion, replacing a nightmare with a happier dream. Tools are the vehicles through which we give ourselves permission to be healed. While we may use prescription drugs, surgery, acupuncture, chiropractic, herbs, energy work, prayer, whatever we use, the operative factor behind all of those tools is the mind. I often cite a brilliant passage from the Manual for Teachers that says, quote, who is the physician? Only the mind of the patient himself. The outcome is what he decides that it is. Special agents seem to be ministering to him, and yet they but give form to his own choice. He chooses them in order to bring tangible form to our desires, and it is this that they do and nothing else. They're actually not needed at all. The patient could merely rise up without their aid and say, quote, I have no use for this, close quotes. There is no form of sickness that would not be cured at once, close quotes. So, our reference of preferred tools work because we have faith in them. All healing is faith healing. This is where, as I remember now that I was reading this before, and I talked about the book Suggestible You. And it's just exploring how science continues to explore whatever limits there might be on our power of belief, on the power of our mind energy focused in a particular direction. All healing is faith healing. Alan writes, a well-respected psychologist, did a cross-cultural study of healing practices. He studied Western medicine, Chinese medicine, spiritual healing, shamanism, voodoo, and other healing modalities. The study found that the results for every single one of these methods was the same. 1/3 of the patients improved, 1/3 remained the same, and 1/3 worsened. Alan asks, what better proof that healing of illness resides in the belief system of the patient more than the method? If we're not careful, ego can get a hold of our tool and wield it on its behalf, and we start to think, my tool is the best tool or the only tool, and everybody else's tool is inferior or wrong. And yet, all tools work for some people, and we must respect their tool if it helps them. One night at a spiritual retreat, I observed a woman reading the emergency magazine, True Stories of Ambulance Calls. And I asked her, how can you read such dramatic material right before bedtime? And the woman smiled and said, listen, I work on a rescue squad, and this gives me some good ideas. So that material would have given me nightmares, yet it helped this woman sleep well. He quotes the textbook as saying, the outcome of the lesson that the Creator's offspring is guiltless is a world in which there is no fear and everything is lit with hope and sparkles with a genuine friendliness. Alan writes, life has a purpose for everything. Even if we don't understand the purpose, it remains useful for those it can help. And then he quotes the workbook from the Course in Miracles that says, I do not know what anything is for. That's the 25th lesson from the workbook. And the Way of Mastery says over and over again, I don't know what anything is or is for, and I don't know what any of my brothers and sisters need. It actually has an exercise that it suggests that we do. Whenever we're moved to do it, wherever you are, pick up an object. Pick up a book, pick up a lamp, pick up a stapler, and just see the truth of the fact that you don't know what this thing is or where it came from. If you pick up a pen, you don't know where those materials came from. Is there some metal in it? Is it completely plastic? What made up the plastic? Where was it created? You don't know who was the first human being to create the idea of a pen. You don't know how many people tried to create a pen before someone was successful. This exercise helps us move into what the Way of Mastery calls divine ignorance. I do not know what anything is or is for. I make it up. I give this moment and everything in it all the meaning it has for me. Alan writes, humility calls us to accept the perfection of all creation. And then he quotes the workbook where it says, we look on everyone as brother and perceive all things as kindly and as good. After a huge rainstorm, a river near my house deposited massive debris into the bay, touching my favorite beach. The entire bay was covered with tree trunks and limbs as far as the eye could see. It was impossible to even get into the water, let alone swim in it. When I saw an ad in the local paper calling for volunteers to help clean up the debris, I went to join a community cleanup one Saturday morning. After I and 100 volunteers worked for several hours, we had hardly made a dent in the mess. Even if we repeated the effort every week, it would take many months or even years to restore the beach. That was not a project that could be fixed piecemeal. It would take more than the many hands to resolve the dilemma. Then the county came in with heavy equipment, excavators and bulldozers, and got the job done in a couple of days, and the beach was restored to its pristine nature. When we try to clean up the debris cluttering our mind piecemeal, we're in for a long, frustrating haul. Ego's attempts to fix ourselves and the world ultimately fail. When we step back from the futile, egoic struggling, and we invite Holy Spirit to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, it will bring in sophisticated equipment to do the heavy lifting and get the job done quickly with no struggle on our part. Ultimately, every tool is a form of magic, for we believe that something other than our mind is healing us. Then he quotes from the workbook where it says, quote, "Dismiss all foolish, magical beliefs today and hold your mind in silent readiness to hear the voice that speaks the truth to you." Close quotes. Ellen writes, "The workbook and other spiritual methods are transitional tools. These are dreams that help us wake up. Yogis teach that if you have a thorn stuck in your foot, you can use another thorn to dislodge it. Then you can throw both thorns away. Eventually, we must renounce all tools, including A Course in Miracles." The workbook, lesson 189, says, quote, "Forget this world, forget this course, and come with whole, complete, empty hands unto your God." Close quotes. Until then, we can be smart monkeys and use the instruments in our divine toolbox to take us home. Michael Ryce likes to talk about how our neuroscientists today indicate that if we're really, really focused, we might be able to be aware of 5 out of every 100 thoughts that go through our mind. He likes to quote the Harvard research that says, in the period of time when there are 10,000 brain cells firing, 10,000 units of electrical activity in the frontal lobes of your brain, the most you can be aware of is 7 bits plus or minus 2, so maybe down to 5, maybe up to 9 individual bits of information you can register, while your mind is processing 10,000. And in that same very brief period of time, varying estimates, a conservative estimate would be that there's probably about 20 trillion bits of data hitting your senses. So Michael Ryce says, so you're living in a 20 trillion bit world. Your carbon-based memory can process 10,000 units of that electrical activity. And in that same period of time, you can only become consciously aware of 9 individual bits at the high end. So you're living your life, and let's say you live your life for the first 30 years, and you've developed some patterns and they're unsatisfactory, and you think, oh, I'm going to use a tool to clean up my mind. And by the way, I'm going to clean up all of the unproductive cross-generational family patterns that I inherited, which they go back, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations, as the scriptures tell us. But if you go back 3 and 4 generations, where did those people in your bloodline get their family history and genetics and energy patterns? From the previous 3 and 4, etc. So it's an infinite cascade down from the beginning of your bloodline. And you're able to process only about 5 out of every 100 thoughts that go through your mind in any moment. And you're going to use your conscious logical mind and those 5 thoughts or those 9 bits out of 10,000 to clean up the garbage that's been passed down for many generations. What are the odds you're ever going to be successful at it? It's like the story of Alan going to the beach with 100 other people and they barely make a dent. But if you bring in the proper tool, the bulldozers and the earth movers, and it gets done in a heartbeat, relatively speaking. The same thing here. If I use my conscious logical mind to try and clean up what's going on in my conscious logical mind and what's going on in my emotionally implicit belief system and my unconscious, my trauma energies that I don't want to look at, etc., I'm never going to get results. The good news is you were given a tool, which is this inner wisdom, connection to divine inspiration. You can call it Holy Spirit, you can call it light, you can call it your higher consciousness, you can call it the unconscious. You were given a tool that will never abandon you, as Guy Finley says, if you just ask it to teach you. And Michael refers to this as the super processor, the breath, the Holy Spirit, the one mind, whatever you want to call it. And so all of the tools that have been most powerful for me in my work as an individual and my work as a therapist are tools that put the conscious logical mind aside or bypass it or get it busy with some simple task and get another more powerful tool in there to highlight and bring to the surface what needs to be cleaned up or released or dismantled or seen as false. So the miraculous insights that Ellen has at the end of this chapter are as follows: 7 questions, or 6 questions and a statement. Question number 1, what tools has the outer world taught you that you need to achieve success, and how well have they worked? Question 2, what spiritual tools do you use to gain inner peace, and how well do they work for you? Question 3, how do the spiritual tools that work for you reflect your beliefs? Question 4, can you allow other people to be successful with their tools even if their beliefs do not match yours? Question 5, what project have you been laboring under with little or no success? Question 6, would you be willing to receive help from a higher power to accomplish your goal with no strain or struggle on your part? Number 7, formulate your own prayer inviting higher power, by whatever name you call it, to step in and handle that project for you. And then he offers 3 affirmations. I am blessed with spiritual tools that make my life better. I put my tools to good and consistent use, and I gain success and healing. I give others the freedom and the support to use their tools, even if they do not match mine. That's a big stretch for a lot of people who are in the religious realm, because most religions that I've ever been introduced to at any depth have some kind of a maxim or a belief in them that says, we have the one right way. And if you're baptized in our system, you're going to heaven. And if you're not baptized in our system, you're going to hell, or you're going to be floundering in purgatory forever or whatever. And one of the things that was read to me by by somebody that was introducing me to the Richard Rohr stuff yesterday was the recognition that we, at higher levels of our own awareness, we recognize that any path to the summit works. Any path that works for an individual is just fine. No one person, no one ideology, no one religion has the lock on truth. They haven't cornered the market on truth, so to speak. So for some people, prayer and meditation works fabulously well. For other people, getting out and doing good works a little bit every day or multiple times a week is what stretches them and helps them grow and expands their life in a blissful way. For other people, sitting in silent prayer and meditation takes them where they believe they need to be or where they want to go. For some people, the tools that are offered by the Catholic Church and the sacraments are just what the doctor ordered. For other people, the Jewish traditions and the Orthodox Jewish traditions, and not putting the wrong kinds of foods on plates, and washing your hands umpteen times through a meal, and not using any kind of artificial power from on the Sabbath, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that works beautifully for them. And it helps them maintain a mindset that allows them to be maximally loving and productive in their lives. And if I can't create a mindset within myself that has allowance and compassion in it for everyone, then I put myself in a prison. Remember, I forget which of the books we were reading recently that talked about if I put somebody else in a prison, if I say, you're bad, you're wrong, you need to be locked up, I have to sit outside the door with the key and make sure they don't get out. And now my life becomes restricted and constricted because I'm trying to not just live my own life, but try and make sure that somebody else doesn't get out or live their life in a way that I think is not right. So this is where we come back to what the Way of Mastery talks about in the third lesson, and the recognition that every single time I judge, if I judge something as good, if I judge something as bad, if I judge something as right or wrong, what it does in my energy system is disruptive. And the Way of Mastery says, if you understood what happens and how the very cellular structure of your body fails to work and function properly, you would never judge again. We talked a little bit earlier about how Bruce Lipton was interviewed by the same person that interviewed Dr. Ryce, and that interview will air on Wednesday, the Mind-Body Bioenergetics. But in that interview with Bruce Lipton, he talks about how his work as a cellular biologist led him to understand very deeply that each cell has its own intelligence. Each cell in the human body functions intelligently. And by that he means it will move toward nutrition, it will move away from physical damage and poisons, it will repair worn out parts, it will excrete waste, and it will enter a shutdown and defense mode if the environment or the signals it gets from the environment tell it that it's not safe. And he says, in the research he did, looking through an electron microscope at human cells, he discovered that what science had believed up until then was that science believed that the nucleus of the cell was the brain of the cell, and that the nucleus directed all the activities of the cell. So he and other researchers decided to take the nucleus out of cells and see what happens. And what he found was you can take the nucleus out of a cell and it keeps functioning beautifully. It still eliminates waste, it still takes in food, and as long as it has the working parts, it repairs new parts. But the nucleus, he discovered, was kind of like the brick production or the parts production, like the gonads, where it could generate new parts, or the stuff that could make new parts. But whether it did any of the activities, those weren't being directed by the nucleus, they were being directed by something else. They were being directed by the brain, which he discovered was in the membrane, and that was being initiated by response to the environment. And the environment could be the physical environment or the energetic or mental environment. And he found that on the edge of every cell in the membrane, every cell in your body has receptor sites for your own mind energy. They call them histogen-specific antigens. And this is part of why if you donate a kidney or a liver to somebody else, then they have to be on immune suppressant drugs, because the immune system of the other person would view cells from your body as foreign and try to attack them and get rid of them. So he's got all of this research about how cells work and what their intelligence is, and what he found is every cell in your body has only two modes of operating. One he called health and growth, in which it will take in nutrients, it will rebuild worn out parts, it will excrete waste, and it will move towards safe environments and away from unhealthy environments. So the health and growth mode is one mode, and the other mode is shutdown and defense. In the shutdown and defense mode, it does not take in nutrients, it doesn't repair worn out parts, and it doesn't excrete waste. It just closes itself down and shuts everything down. He uses the analogy of people in the wars where they used to have bomb shelters, and in the bomb shelters they would have them stocked with food and water and rations, and so people would go into the bomb shelters when the air raids came for a short period of time. However, if they stayed locked in the bomb shelter too long, they would run out of food and water, and they would drown in their own waste. Well, that's what happens to cells in your body if you stay in the shutdown and defense mode too long. We'll tie this to the idea that these receptor sites on your cells respond to your mind energy as the primary determinant for whether they stay in health and growth mode or they go into shutdown and defensive mode. So the cells in your body might be exposed to completely clean water, fresh air, plenty of good nutrients, but if your mind is in screaming and stress and rage, and it sends the signal to your body, and the cells start to go into shutdown and defense mode, and they don't function properly. Way of Mastery in the third lesson says almost exactly what Bruce Lipton found in his cellular biological research. And they say, if you could understand what happens even at the cellular level of your body, every time you judge, you would never judge again. So, what are we doing? We're inviting ourselves, we're teaching tools that help us soften and breathe and relax and ask to be taught and choose for love over fear, and understand that there's a level of functioning that's outside our conscious logical mind, that's beyond what our five senses can introduce us to, that we can only get access to if we are willing to ask. If we're willing to drop out of that driven, what the Way of Mastery calls the intellect, which can only do what it's been programmed to do, which functions like, it says, like a garbage can shoved full of trivialities, and soften and ask to be shown. Breathe and open. And when we do that, as opposed to judging, the very cellular structure of our body functions differently. So that's what the invitation is. That's the hopeful result of every worksheet that's done. We had somebody did a worksheet in the group last night, and when it was done, she said, well, I don't really feel much of anything. Then we had her scan her body and rate her upset level, which had started at a 7 out of 10. And she had a surprised tone in her voice when she said, well, it's less. It's clearly less. So she got no insight. She got no flashback to an earlier time in her life with trauma and emotional upset that had been downloaded. And yet her stress level reduced, her upset level reduced. And what we're offering with these tools, whether it's the EFT tapping, the breath work, the reality management worksheet, the targeted journaling, the goal canceling at any level, even just reciting the forgiveness pattern that says, I cancel my need to be right. I cancel my need for anyone or anything to change, including myself. I put my conscious logical mind aside for the moment, and I ask to be shown the hidden part of my own mind that's actually creating this upset. What we're inviting ourselves to do is to soften and breathe and allow and choose for love over anything else, over anger or fear or judgment at any level. So I thank you all for being here. I again want to reiterate that Michael and Jeanie are not doing shows yesterday or today on Needle, and all next week they will not be on Needle. They will be posting shows on Podbean. So if you look for Mindshifter Radios on Podbean, and this is quite an opportunity to get access to now 6 audio files that you would not get unless you paid for their DVDs. Today, the second part will be Circle of Life, Part 2. Monday and Tuesday will be Empowered to Heal, Parts 1 and 2. Wednesday will be Dr. Michael Ryce's hour-long interview with the gentleman from Mind Body Bioenergetics. And then Thursday and Friday will be Naturopathic Keys to Health, Part 1 and 2. I'll be back on Monday, and I will invite you all to have a wonderful weekend and remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.